So we're going to bring back onto the stage a face that you're familiar with now, David Stewart from ICF. And we've also, so yeah, with David, we're going to be talking about procurement trends. And I was having a chat with David before the panels this morning. And David pointed out that he's been very, in terms of procurement, he's been quite involved in terms of the systems on board aircraft, and also helping airlines with doing arrangements for the maintenance, repair and overhaul of their aircraft. So we're going to kind of focus a bit on that. David, do you want to just say a few words? Yeah. Okay, so David's going to come up onto the podium and give us a presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I want to talk basically about, just for 5-10 minutes, some key trends in the supply chain for the manufacturers and some key trends in the supply chain for the aftermarket. When you say procurement trends, I mean everybody's procuring. The aircraft OEMs are procuring from the component OEMs, who are procuring from the, there's various tiers, which I'll show in the next chart. And again, the airlines are procuring maintenance and aftermarket services from their supply base. So procurement can be defined in many different ways, but some of these trends will drive who your vendors are, or if you're a vendor, what your customers are kind of looking for. The aerospace supply chain. Effectively, you've got the operators, you've got the manufacturers. Supplying to those manufacturers, you've got really kind of systems integrators. So in there, you're looking like the Hamilton Sundstrands, the Goodridges, the Honeywells, and on the engine side, obviously, at the module level, you've got people like MTU, Volvo, and you've got the engine OEMs on top of that. Tier 2, sub-assembly manufacturers and the make-to-print component guys, and right down the bottom there, the materials process. So that's the supply chain. And so there's a whole variety of different customer and supplier relationships within that. The 4 mega trends, I guess, that I want to talk about within that supply chain. There's consolidation. That supply chain is globalizing. There's the rise of China within all of this, and there's some consolidation at the tier 4. And clearly, the latest and big event is the purchase by UTC of Goodrich. So they're combining Hamilton Sundstrand with Goodrich. And what does this mean for further tier 1 consolidation? And despite that consolidation, there's still rigorous competition between the other tier 1 suppliers in most of these segments. If you look at, for example, aerostructures, your top level supplier, share of around now at 10%. So the top 2 have got a share of around about sort of 15–18%. There's a lot of competition going for the remaining part of that particular market, vigorous competition. And the same goes through lots of the other production segments like flight controls, environmental control system, wheels and brakes. So there's plenty of room for further consolidation at that tier 1 and tier 2 level. And the tier 1, the aircraft OEM strategies are going to facilitate that, because what are they after? They're after fewer suppliers. What's been happening over the last few years is that the aircraft manufacturers are asking more of their tier 1s. The tier 1s are having to do more of the design, take on more of the risk, take on more of the development, and they're trying to deliver a systems package to Airbus, Boeing, etc. And as an example here, Embraer, on the 145, they had 350 suppliers with 4 risk-sharing partners back on 1999. Come the 170, just 38 with 16 partners. Look at Rolls-Royce, back in the good old days of the 211, 400 suppliers. The XWB, there's less than 50. So they're demanding, they want fewer suppliers offering more, i.e. it facilitates, encourages further tier 1 consolidation. And you can see it happening. Suppliers have been merging to complete that system solutions. Look at Meggitt. It bought Pacific Scientific. It means that they can get in and do a lot more in the detection and the suppression. They can do integrated systems, providing value for the OEM and providing value for the downstream airline. However, size by itself does not inherently create more profitable suppliers. You have to be good at what you're doing. Size is not the game and the end game in and of itself. So it presents challenges to those tier ones. It means you have to share complementary R&D, for example. It means you have to create a global aftermarket outlook and coordinate your efforts in the aftermarket to maintain customer satisfaction. Whoops. That supply chain has been globalizing. A lot of people have used this word globalization over the last few years. We did some research to actually say, well, you know, what is the data? What's the actual genuine facts? And we researched about 160 manufacturers and MROs and looked over, since 1995, what have they done? What JVs and acquisitions have they done? Why have they done them and where have they done them? Why and where have they done these investments? And you can see it's been massively increasing since 1995 in terms of the number of manufacturing investments in particular over the last 15 years. Why? Most of it driven because they want to find lower cost manufacturing to underpin their earnings and get access to markets. So much so that some OEMs are even looking at tracking a new metric, the percentage of employees in low-cost countries, as a way of measuring their success in globalizing. Where have those investments been happening? A lot in Mexico and a lot in China. Those have been the dominant spaces, again, primarily driven by the need to access markets and the need to access lower-cost labor. As a result of which, new aerospace clusters are emerging. You had the traditional clusters in North America and Europe, and suddenly they're kind of heading south. And you've got emerging clusters of manufacturing, Singapore, Malaysia, United Arab Emirates, Brazil. It's all happening, and there's a lot of change going on and where planes or parts for planes are being manufactured. Moving on to the third point, the rise of China, there's an absolute plethora of investments in manufacturing in China. There was a session obviously on that yesterday. This probably reflects an awful lot of that, but that's an extremely busy map, come what may, because of their deep manufacturing capability, because of their comparative advantage in labor. And China has also been trying to access or get into some of the capabilities they need to develop their own aerospace programs. And it started off with an acquisition trail in 2009, where they wanted to make sure they were able to get into composites manufacturing. So they bought Fisher Advanced Composite Components in 2009, and that's been followed by other access to Epic Air in 2010. What does that give them? It gives them an access and understanding of general aviation. It gives them an understanding of how to design and develop aircraft and bring some composites capability. They bought Continental Motors. How do I power those general aviation aircraft? Engine technology. Last but not least, they're buying Cirrus. And Cirrus, I mean, they're one of the biggest production manufacturers of general aviation. They pump out aircraft. They're going to be learning about manufacturing processes. So you can see what China's doing. They're trying to develop their understanding and knowledge of how to manufacture, design, power aircraft with a deliberate acquisition strategy. Oop. Last but not least, there's consolidation going down at the bottom end of the supply chain, the tier 4, the raw materials suppliers. They're trying to move up the value chain, increase their margins, increase their earnings, getting into some of the customization of the millings and the forgings and the castings and the machining of those. And there's some huge changes happening at that end of the supply chain with the combination of ATI and Laddish, PCC acquiring Primus, and Carpenter and Technology and Latrobe. MRO supply chains, I'm being quick because I want to leave time for the questions and sessions. What are the key trends in the MRO supply chain? And I think there are 6 of those. The things that are definitely going to happen. I can't necessarily predict for you fuel prices, I can't necessarily predict for you exchange rates, but these things will happen. And the first thing is the growing interest in the MRO market from the airframe OEMs. Airbus, Boeing have woken up to the fact that component manufacturers and the engine OEMs make a lot of money in the aftermarket, and they don't. Hence, you see Airbus and Boeing moving into the airframe, to the MRO market with, and for those who know, there's the Airbus FHS, Flying Hour Services Program, Tailor Support Programs. Boeing, they've got their Gold Care Program. Clearly, that globalization that I was talking about affects MRO. You have to be able to, if you are an OEM or an MRO in Europe, how do you access that growth in Asia? The maintenance market in Asia will be bigger than the maintenance market in Europe or North America in 10 years' time. So you've got to try and access, or if you want to continue to growth and access that, you need to develop a strategy to do that. In terms of buying of maintenance, airlines more and more want integrated services. Rather than going to 45 different component overhaul and repair suppliers and managing that supply base, they want one flying hour agreement from one supplier. And they're going to OEMs, they're going to integrators like Lufthansa Technik, SR Technics, ST Aerospace in this region, EC in this region, to get a flying hour rate for component maintenance, have their planes looked after for them. They want to worry about passengers, they don't want to worry about maintenance. Consolidation, we've seen consolidation in this space too, with the OEMs doing that and distributors doing that. No-brainer, cost focus. That's part of the DNA of this industry. It has to happen. And then, last but not least, we've been talking just been talking about the increased production rates, new planes coming in. If you're an MRO, how do you get access to this new fleet? The growth of those new technology planes is huge. But if you only got access to old 737s and old MD-80s, how do you get access into those markets of the new planes? Because there's a huge switchover coming over in terms of the technology of the planes, which has an implication for your portfolio and investment in test equipment, etc. And I think, one more chart to illustrate the OEMs getting into this market and the changing nature of the aftermarket. 777, if you take 100% of the overhaul and repair generated on a 777 and allocate it to the manufacturer, the 777 is a huge plethora of different OEMs on that plane. And it's quite easy to compete with all of those manufacturers who've got relatively small shares on that plane. Look at the 787. There are 5 manufacturers, now 4, that generate 80% of the overhaul and repair on that aircraft, giving them much greater ability to control the aftermarket and service aftermarket and fund their design and development that they've been asked to do by the airframe manufacturers. And that is genuinely it. Thank you very much.
So our next speaker is going to is Alex Soh from Jamaica Airways Cargo.
Yeah, good morning. What is it? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A little bit introduction of my company. My company is in Jamaica. We set up in Jamaica. It's called Jamaica Far East. We are about to set up an air operating lease aircraft cargo flight operation directly from the Far East to South America. We have acquired our air operator certificate as well as our IATA airline designator. So from this discussion of this topic, we are the buyer of a procurement process. In this area, we are looking more rather than brand new aircraft, but more into the lease market. Basing on the routing that we are going to have, can I have the next slide, please? This is the incorporation that we have. Now, okay, the routing, we have here a global map. What we are trying to do is we are trying to move cargo from China, which is a main marketplace now of manufacturing, as well as Southeast Asia, all the way to South America, half the world away. Now, this is a very long-distance proposition. We need to stop somewhere. We are looking at one proposition is into Southern Europe, for refueling. And the other way, can we have more further? The routings. The next slide, yes. The other direction we are going for is to South Africa and on to South America and to Jamaica. Now, the consideration of such a procurement for a second-hand aircraft based on such a long distance is that we have to look at a very high-capacity aircraft. And looking at what we have available in the market, the 747-400 is the most ideal for us at the moment on the lease market, on the second-hand lease market. And considering the long fuel burn, I think one of the most economical under the economic consideration is the 747-400. Well, as compared to a 777 freighter, of course, it will be better, but it's more expensive. And various marketing consideration and various application of the market of offloading and uploading cargo, we consider that older aircraft would be much better. And of course, aircraft utilization for such a route, we are looking at almost about 14 hours a day. And maintenance can be a consideration over a series of time. So we have to look at vendors and a very good lessor to provide us in this usage of equipment, of aircraft equipment. One of the characteristics that we use is not from the dry lease market, but we prefer to go for the wet lease market, which is a one package deal. The supply of flight crew, operation staff, maybe even recommendation of handling company globally to all the various stops. So with that, I would like to say that we hope to start this operation, which we hope to be a weekly charter operation sometime towards the end of April. So that will be my presentation of my company. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Always good to hear about new startup airlines. Everyone loves a new startup because a new startup is basically a new opportunity. So, Alex, with your airline, you mentioned how you're looking to start with a wet lease operation. Can you go in a little bit more detail about why a wet lease is appealing to you as opposed to a dry lease?
Well, we are firstly not a national carrier, despite that I have a Jamaican air operator certificate. Of course, every startup, though we have all the best connection and best equipment supplier coming forward to help us start the operation, finance is always a big problem, as we know. It's very difficult to get money, as the first two speakers have said. I can go to the bank and say that I'm going to do this project. And this project seems to be a very interesting project, but very high risk. So most banks will say, thank you very much. You can have a cup of coffee, but we can't lend you money. It's too high risk. So I have a big problem here. Though I can get concession from various regulatory agency from the Jamaican government, in terms of some tax or some lower cost in lease or whatever area. So it's a real challenge for me to get money. And even though I'm not getting hundreds of millions, but just a couple of million is still a very challenging proposition for a startup entity. So what I look to is to the logistic market, my stakeholder in this air cargo operation. I look towards the freight forwarders that think that this route will provide good revenue for them. And so I get this initial startup funding from my stakeholder in the freight industry.
David, I was just wondering, with your expertise dealing with different MROs, like if you're a startup airline, you've obviously got your business plan that goes out for 5-10 years, but just because you're starting out and you're just new, in terms of dealing with maintenance providers, ground handlers, what's some of the pitfalls that you should look out for, and how, what should you be willing to commit to and not be willing to commit to?
I always kind of believe that sort of you've got to focus on what your core market is and what your core business is. And when you're starting up, it's really important to get the revenue side of the equation correct. On the other hand, you have to maintain control over your cost base. So if you just take the maintenance piece about it, what drives the cost base and maintenance? It's the maintenance plan, it's the reliability of the equipment, it's the availability of the equipment, and it's keeping those planes flying by having an effective operations control and maintenance control. So what I believe is core to that is having that, what I call the brain and the intelligence of maintenance inside the airline. You can fundamentally for airframe maintenance, for engine overhaul, for component overhaul and repair, it's a very viable, very competitive third-party market. Why bother doing it in-house, especially when you're small? Maybe when you get 200 planes, you can actually think about bringing some of that in-house, mainly C-checks, I'd venture to suggest. And as these new technology planes come along, setting up engine capability is very expensive. You know, test cells, 20 million plus. Buying a test bench for avionics is millions of dollars. So why set it up? These things are getting more reliable. You're getting less events. So the business case for setting up maintenance is getting less and less. So as a small airline, you've got plenty of people out there prepared to. And at the very start, there are airlines or suppliers who will actually manage the fleet for you. So, I mean, when I helped set up EasyJet 1997, when they had 3 planes, they had 3 engineers, and they outsourced everything to what was a firm called FLS at the time. And even when they got to 60 planes, they were managing their whole fleet with just 6 people in maintenance. No, they changed it now because they need to control that. But you can get enormous economies of scale and become low cost by just having intelligent management of your third-party base, which means airlines need to get much, much better at managing contracts and managing suppliers. That's a key challenge.
And with maintenance, repair and overhaul, it's such a specialist industry. Like those, you mentioned how, you know, they were able to operate with 6 managers. What's the sort of skill set, like if you're interviewing people for that position, what's the sort of skill set and experience and knowledge that they need to be able to do a job like that?
Track record, you need to have managed, I mean, bottom line is if you're going to see how a provider is going to behave, you need to have been inside the provider. So you need to have done it yourself. So there's that. And then you need some very wise, experienced people to help you set up the contract. There's huge pitfalls in the contract. And so just like for the lessor side of it, if you decide to lease a plane, you need an experienced engineer who's going to make sure your return conditions are not going to give you a huge sting in the tail in 7, 8, 9, 10 years' time. It's really been there, done that. And also being good at partnership.
Yeah, return lease conditions is a real pitfall that airlines face because they tend to think about, you know, how much they need to pay each month in lease rates, but then they don't think about the money that goes into the maintenance pool. And then sometimes with older aircraft, the money that goes into the maintenance pool can actually be higher, the monthly lease rate. And then, yeah, there's a lot of terms and conditions that the leasing companies will put in the contract, which are very detailed and specialised that maybe a leasing person may not understand. So, yeah, you need to have somebody who's got a lot of experience in the MRO industry to understand all of those terms and conditions. Alex, I was just wondering, with your new business, I guess another issue you've got is, like you brought up the routes that you're going to be flying. That's involving a lot of fifth freedoms. What's the situation in terms of getting the traffic rights? Is it not an issue so much because you're a charter airline? Is that the situation?
Well, traffic right is a real main issue, despite all the mix that is available. However, we have done our homework. We have those traffic rights, at least to most of the percentage. But as a charter flight, we can always apply from point A to point B, usually with relative ease, despite all the heavy paperwork that we have to go through, with the only fact that if the home airline of the respective country or carrier or any other carrier is not in competition, So what we are doing is not done by any entity as far as we know. We are actually doing something that is a very direct routing. So we hope to bring all the cargo within 24 hours to the other half of the world. Whereas what we can see at the moment is it's not more of a direct routing, but rather stopping over at some point where the cargo has to move to another airport or to change another carrier. But we are going to go through with throughput of a cargo. So in this case, the efficiency is there, and we hope that we can increase the trading between both continents of Asia and South America. It is unfortunate at the moment that Europe is not doing well, and so is the United States. Trading has sort of slowed down. In fact, if we load a full load of cargo, the rate has gone down so much that it might not even be worth to carry the cargo. So this is a real challenge today with the economic situation. Coming back to what David has said, the maintenance is of course a very important consideration. At least a minimum of 2 aeroplanes got to be utilized for common reason, common sense. If one is AOG, the other aircraft can help support wherever it is down, because this is a very global kind of operation. So at least 2 aeroplanes is required. Otherwise, big losses can be met. The other consideration, of course, as in all startup and even matured carrier, is the situation of an in-flight shutdown. So maintenance got to be monitored very closely, especially on engines. We can't afford in-flight shutdown. In fact, that could kill the very operation. The very reason is we have to change an engine, we have to lease another engine, we have to overhaul the engine that is unserviceable. This can and will create heavy costs, and a startup or a new carrier cannot afford to do that. So maintenance efficiency is very, very important.
I guess the next question I was wanting to ask David, with a startup airline, I've always wondered, because you've got an airline that only has 1 or 2 aircraft, you don't have the buying power of a Singapore Airlines or a Cathay Pacific. You go to a supplier and you've only got 1 or 2 planes. How can you extract a good deal, or what strategies can you employ to make sure that you get a competitive rate and you're taken seriously?
I think at the beginning you obviously are a little bit stuffed, basically. You know, the basics. Certainly, my experience of the sort of 2 or 3 I've been in sort of experience with, you start up with. We actually started with a wet lease. I mean, EasyJet started with a wet lease, okay. And so you minimise your overhead whilst you test the business model. So sort of, and you try and verify everything as much as possible in terms of costs. Then you start out second-hand aircraft, gently, and the 2 most important things I always believe in terms of getting a good deal: competitive tension, obviously, and timing. Timing is all. So I ran the evaluation, again, harping back to EasyJet, but forgive me, when they bought 150 A319s. And their timing was absolutely dead on perfect. They started the campaign of the purchase in October 2001, when basically there was a huge kind of post 9/11. Airlines were clamping down, not going to buy new planes. They were still growing. The OEMs were desperate to sell planes. Oh, and by the way, Airbus hadn't sold a single A320 to a low-fare carrier in Europe. So they were trying to find someone to sell it to. So you had a huge competitive tension. So it's about timing. Timing is the one that gets you. So have a look at it and see what you can do. It's scale, timing, and competitive tension.
Yeah, a good point about competitive tension. Yeah, it's always good to have a few suppliers competing against one another and making the suppliers know that they're having to compete against one another. And also the point you make about timing is very relevant at this particular air show, because we had Bombardier announce yesterday an order by Garuda Indonesia for CRJ-1000s. And Garuda is an airline that traditionally has never been able to get a good price on aircraft. They always pay a little bit over the market rate, but in the case of the CRJ-1000, they got a very good deal on that aircraft, because Bombardier just hasn't been selling many CRJ-1000s and their production line is basically shrivelling up. So Bombardier were very keen to get an order in there just to keep the production line going. So a case of history repeating itself.
I think and another thing is you can try and kind of disrupt it, bring something novel in. So for example, one of the things that is now available is you just sort of say, well, you basically take them away from their comfort zone. Airbus and Boeing ultimately should be accountable for the costs of the planes they sell in operation as well. So you come along and say to them, just forget this purchase price. I just want to buy a plane that's flying in the sky. So tell me what it is. You take accountability for its reliability, its performance, etc. All I want is a plane that flies. Thrust by hour or cost per flying hour, the whole lot. Disrupt it, give them something new, kind of force it through to suit your business model. Oh, and by the way, of course, there's always the argument about escalation, which is a continuing thorn in everyone's side.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, perhaps on this aspect, on the wet list is a cost per flying hour, total cost. So it's easier to calculate and easier to manage and vary it. And if the product is not good, we can always look at alternative.
And I guess with the wet lease agreement, yeah, they have to ensure that the plane is flying the number of hours it's supposed to be flying. The risk is on their part in terms of the contract.
Yes, we do share. I think we believe we are sharing equal risk. On the very fact that if it's a new business model, there is always risk that cannot be denied. But the challenge is that we try to get the correct mix of the situation. Like what David said, timing is absolutely of the essence. So that is how most operations do. Yeah.
I was wanting to ask you, David, one of the trends that seems to be happening with the OEMs is they're getting into the aftermarket more. They're trying to get people to... I was reading like Rolls-Royce is saying that 52% of their revenue now comes from maintenance support and maintenance contracts, not from the sale of new engines. So for me as a buyer, what's the pitfall for me in sort of getting tied into a 10-year maintenance service agreement? What's the pros and cons of that?
Well, I mean, the reason you're doing it is because you're trying to simplify your supply. You're simplifying. It's predictable cash flow, so you know what you're going to be spending because it's typically tied into a flying hour rate. You're reducing your risk, so they're particularly appropriate. Most people do a flying hour rate when it's a new plane and there's risk in the reliability. You don't know whether there's going to be a massive engine failure and have a huge, AD camera with some service bulletins and all that sort of thing which you have to cope with. So you get rid of the risk. That's why you buy it or have it. But the downside is, how much are you paying? You don't know whether in 10 years' time that's a good deal. And you know that there's an insurance premium in there somewhere. So when you're negotiating, how do you get transparency in that? Same thing goes for a flying hour agreement for overall maintenance support. In your tender, how do you get transparency of how much that is costing you? So you need to actually drill down and how much are they actually charging you for logistics? Where are they taking their margin and manage a tender that really analyzes the drivers of the cost under it to make sure you're getting a competitive benchmark deal. You can do a flying hour at the end of it, but have a tender that really breaks it down. You understand the drivers of their costs. And then ultimately, you've got to do things like, well, you set a flying hour out, you know they're doing re-engineering, they're trying to improve their cost. And it's something, particularly if you're a large airline, you're bringing economies of scale to their operation. How do you share in that benefit? So you set up your contracts. So they may want to throw in an escalation clause, Oh, hang on, I'm giving you my volume. Let's have some de-escalation. Negotiate hard. But you've got to make sure that you're not being ripped off in that flying hour rate.
Great. Well, thank you very much, David and Alex, for your presentations today. And I'd like the audience to give a round of applause to our two panellists. Thank you.